The Louisiana Trust for Historic Preservation is continuing our educational video series with our next cultural conversation. Today, we will be talking with Heritage Resource Consultant Sarah Marsom on maximizing your reach with different audiences through unconventional storytelling. Many of these approaches and strategies focus on stories of hidden histories and underrepresented peoples and places. Hi, Sarah. How are you today?
I'm doing great. And you?
Doing well. Thank you for joining us. Before we get started, could you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
So I'm Sarah Marsom. Like Will said, I'm a heritage resource consultant based in Columbus, Ohio, but I have the pleasure of working around the country. I specialize in education and outreach strategies and also just strategic visioning for cultural resource organizations. I really work to try and help organizations understand how they can cultivate relevance through storytelling and then also creative partnerships. You never know how well an arts organization or a farming group or whatever the organization could partner with preservation in a really organic way and expand your reach. So I really encourage people to think through that and to help them develop programming that makes it successful.
Great. So we're just going to dive into our little Q&A here. And our first question is, how are some ways for people to first identify, then research different and distinct histories associated with their historic site or within their community or in their city?
I always suggest people start by assessing what they currently do and what stories they currently tell. So, for example, you may be interpreting a battlefield and telling the stories of the soldiers. Who else was there? Did we have medical crew that you're not telling stories of? Or what about the people who owned the land prior or during the battle? What are the pieces of the puzzle that you're not potentially considering? And you can assess these based on your own expertise, but also thinking through what are the demographics that aren't showing up? Are you only getting people who are interested in one specific topic, or are you getting people who show up and ask questions that maybe challenge your story or make you consider new narratives? I really suggest assessing what you currently have. And then the number one step for anybody doing a research or storytelling project should always be the library. Your local librarians or your state librarians are the best resource to help you research and find those hidden narratives. While all of us working in the preservation field have been trained in research, librarians cover such a comprehensive range that they're really great assistance to help you find those hidden narratives, which could be finding records of the enslaved. It could be finding coded language. For example, in my research for LGBTQ heritage, I've had to use terms which many of us consider unacceptable today, but those are the terms I've had to use when researching old newspapers. So you almost have to take your brain back into time and consider what language people used, and that can help with your research as well to find these lesser known narratives.
Those are all great tips, especially museums or just any historic site, looking at, who your audience currently is, and is it local, is it visitor, is it different age groups, and then of course the library. It's a resource in so many ways to a community, physically, research wise, and even community engagement and activity. So those are all great tips. Our next question are, what are some unconventional approaches to storytelling for some of these underrepresented people and places?
When we think about heritage interpretation, since the beginning of us doing it in a more standard format, since the 1800s with Anne Pamela Cunningham and the Mount Vernon Ladies Association, we think of walking tours. And then we think of museums and exhibits. So how do we either tweak these existing approaches to reach the people who don't want that, Or how do we create new approaches? So some great examples of tweaking existing approaches would be Museum Hack. It's a company that gives museum tours in New York City and LA and elsewhere. And what they do is they utilize pop cultural references to create tours. So they did Game of Thrones tours through the Met and things like that. So, it's a slight tweak to engage a broader audience by integrating what's popular today and using that to connect to the past. Or I'm a huge fan of utilizing bike tours. I loved partnering with Rory Krupp, a consultant here in Ohio, for him to give tours of African American civil rights sites by bike. And that's the only feasible way we can do the tour of the civil rights sites because of how disparate they are in the city. So sometimes you just need to subtly tweak, but then also consider things like trades. How can you tell stories through creativity? I love doing sewing workshops, for example, and during celebrations for the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment, I helped people create their own banners as an homage to the ones that suffragettes used. I wasn't taking them on a tour of a house where one of those wonderful women resided. I was helping people create and connect to the past through a more tactile way. So it's kind of just like subtle shifts that you can do, or just trying a new strategy. And when you try new strategies, that'll open up your organization to new potential funders.
Great. Those are all great tips, especially, connecting with different people and different mediums, I guess you could say, whether it's through bike or other experiential activities. That's kind of drawing people in they may come for one reason, but they learn about another thing in the end. That's great. So our next question are, what are some successful approaches in particular to engage younger audiences, or like you mentioned in our first question, those audiences you might not see all the time or that you're not necessarily attracting to your historic site or your community?
For historic sites and communities, we typically get, third graders or whatever year they learn about their local community. So you see them, and then you may never see those students again until they bring their own children to the site. So how do we make it so that our site's engaging for people at multiple points of time? So one strategy, for example, if you're looking to engage your K through 12 audience, how do you connect to more than one aspect of the curriculum? I had such a pleasure giving tours to third graders for the German Village Society, but I'd only see them in third grade and to walk them around the neighborhood. So I developed hands-on math-infused, art-infused workshops for students to come back and help relay sidewalks as a part of a community service activity, which was required by some of the schools. How do you connect to more than one specific topic? And I guarantee you, historic sites connect to decorative arts. They can connect to science if you think about water and, a roof prevents water, so that connects to angles and math. You can connect to multiple learning styles. And then when we think about young adults, and I'll say I'm a millennial, but a lot of us exist on social media due to our upbringing. So it's really imperative for us to not just consider how we tell the stories at the specific site, but how can we bring them to our new audiences? And Old Salem Museum and Gardens in North Carolina is a great example of that. They've been a historic site since, I believe, the 1930s. And right now, they have over 100,000 followers on TikTok. And they've been doing that by using the hashtags, capitalizing on some of the dance trends, but then also just using that new video strategy to help people understand how those historic craftsmen created the neighborhood. So I know that it can be daunting to create your stories in new mediums. But think about it. You already have this existing content. You just have to try a new way to tell that story at a new platform, and you will just expand your reach in new ways, and that can encourage new people to visit as well.
That's great. I don't use TikTok, but that's the way to connect with even younger and, get people to replicate or come to that site. I'm sure a lot of people have since come to that site because they've seen that in particular. And so they learned a lot, something new in their neighborhood, something new in their backyard. We get to explore that and learn the history behind it as well.
Exactly. And once you see something online, you're more likely to visit in person. And I also, I highly recommend, as you assess your tours and your storytelling, to also think of the references that you use. Sometimes a reference to Star Wars, that can be relatively timeless, but I've been on tours where, they're referencing some country Western movie from the 1960s. And I love John Wayne, but I don't know all of his movies. So, think through what contemporary references could be, and then that way you can increase your search engine optimization. If you're telling stories of cowboys, maybe John Wayne's not the best example in 2021. Maybe it's Little Nas and Old Town Road. Just consider tweaking things little by little to help cultivate the relevance.
Great. And so our last question here is, what are some successful ways, and we've talked about these in different elements here, but what are some successful ways to integrate these concepts into other programs and events, community activities, both on like a short-term, maybe low-hanging fruit, short-term project, and as well as like long-term impact for, again, whether it's a historic site, a Main Street community, or, throughout a whole region?
Again, assess what you're currently doing. What are your annual events? Do you have an annual home and garden tour? Does your Main Street program have a farmer's market? What do you currently do? Now, as we assess what we currently do, we already know that we should assess what stories we're telling and what audiences we may or may not be engaging. And how can we incorporate that into our existing events? So, for example, for our farmers markets, we typically see people come to our communities, shop, and then they vanish. How do we connect them to stay longer? So maybe you want to create a self-guided tour that people can pick up, and then during, before, or after the farmers market, they can go on a self-guided tour of the historic neighborhood that's next to your downtown or through your downtown. Maybe that can incorporate into a signage project or an arts project. Or maybe you create pop-up events. In Toronto, Canada, I've seen some really fun events for youth where they use the, like the crates for fruits and veggies or your egg carton, and they use it to build a little pop-up city at the farmers market. There's lots of different fun ways we can enhance our existing events. And then as we enhance our existing events, we start to cultivate more potential stakeholders. And I highly recommend hosting focus groups with your stakeholders. Now, these stakeholders are, for example, representatives from your Convention and Visitor Bureau. It's people who work at historic sites nearby. It's the people who regularly come to events. It's the people who volunteer for you. And then it's also, what are the organizations in your community that haven't been a part of these events? You're hosting these great events and they're annual events for a reason, but why isn't this neighborhood group a part of things? Or who are the people you haven't partnered with? And then have focus groups with these people to ask, what can we do to partner with you moving forward? So I'm all about partnerships, and I read partnerships again and again because good partnerships will open you up to more funding opportunities. And also, it helps get you more promotional partners. It helps just enhance you in so many ways. And you'll find when you expand to these partners They'll tell you what resources exist beyond the libraries. Maybe you'll find out, for example, your local LGBTQ nonprofit already has an oral history project going on. Maybe you'll find out that the local Black church in your community has been collecting newspaper clippings. You can find these really intimate storytelling assets when you cultivate these new partnerships and assess. And I just really recommend, that first call or that first email when you try and build a relationship. It may not be a success, but continue reaching out and don't always expect people to come to you, go to them. And this seems odd. I know you're all busy running nonprofits or running a downtown development group, but going to people where they exist helps build that trust, which can then in turn help give you more knowledge so that you can tell the stories of people who've been historically excluded from your narrative, so that you can learn about potential partnership activities and build upon them, so that you all can create this symbiotic relationship and help support each other. Because we're not fighting over small morsels in our communities. We want to continue to build the preservation table to be bigger and fuller of more people of all ages, and to not just expect people to give you things, but also to empower people. One of my favorite Main Street managers, Lindsay Dotson in Michigan, she has created in every Main Street community she's worked at a high school board where high schoolers actually are given power to make decisions. And one of their most successful projects recently is the high schoolers helped design and fundraised for an entire alleyway streetscape campaign where they got historic photos, they got oversized chessboards, like places to sit, and they turned this just kind of dingy alley into a place where people want to be for seasons. So, we build these relationships, we build these partnerships, and then we help give people voices to be a part of our process.
I can't agree more. Partnership is how everything works, and how new things happen, or things that get kind of put to the wayside come back to life and really regenerate activity and ideas and involvement in the community. Well, those are all the questions I have for today. Is there anything else you'd like to add, or any final words of wisdom?
Big question, the last one. I just encourage people to keep moving forward. I know that we're all navigating difficult times right now with the pandemic, but consider this as your opportunity to try new things, or when your visitor level is a bit lower than it historically is, that gives you more time to schedule these conversations for potential partnerships, or to work on that evaluation of your existing tour. Seize right now as the opportunity to assess what you've done historically and to try new things. It doesn't hurt to try something new online right now. Not everything will be a home run, trust me on that, but trying is a really important first step.
Okay, well, thank you so much for joining us today. And